The monitoring station hung in the darkness between stars like a forgotten nearing, its solar collectors drinking in the faint light of distant suns. Inside its cramped control room, Naya Velter traced bioluminescent patterns across her tempora, nervous habits she'd developed during the long, solitary shifts. Her translucent blue skin caught the amber glow of the communication arrays, creating ripples of light that danced across the cramped workspace. The Zelhari High Council had assigned her to this remote outpost precisely because of her unique gift. She could hear electromagnetic signatures that others missed, could feel the emotional resonance behind even the most clinical transmissions. It was a gift that had made her invaluable to military intelligence, and a curse that had left her isolated from her own people. The constant bombardment of alien thoughts and feelings had driven her to seek solitude among the stars, where the only voices were those she chose to receive. The shift had been routine until the crimson signal pierced through the usual cosmic static. Emergency frequency, human origin, weak but desperate. Naya's fingers hesitated over the controls. Protocol demanded she forward all alien distress calls to the military command. But something in the signal's harmonic structure made her pause. She fine-tuned the receiver, isolating the transmission from the background noise. The voice that emerged was male, young, speaking in the clipped cadence of someone fighting panic. "This is salvage vessel Wanderer's Dream. Registry 774 Alpha. Primary engines offline. Life support failing. Position, static overwhelmed." The coordinates, but Naya's enhanced hearing caught fragments. The ship was close. Maybe 6 hours by shuttle. She closed her eyes and let her gift wash over the signal. Beneath the human's words, she felt his emotions, determination fighting against despair, the weight of responsibility for someone else's life. And underneath it all, a deep loneliness that resonated with her own. Naya's luminescent markings pulsed, brighter as she wrestled with the decision. The Zelhari Confederacy maintains strict neutrality in human territorial disputes, and unauthorized contact with alien vessels was a court-martial offense. Her career, her freedom, possibly her life all hung in the balance. But the emotion in that signal called to something deeper than duty. She opened a secure channel to the Confederate Navy, preparing to file the required report, then stopped. The human's next transmission was weaker, more fragmented. Emergency reserves at 12%. "If anyone's listening, if anyone cares, there's a woman here, unconscious, hurt. I won't let her die out here alone." The raw humanity in his voice shattered her resolve. Naya switched off the recording system and began powering up her personal shuttle. Whatever consequences awaited, she couldn't live with the alternative. The Wanderer's Dream wasn't hard to find. It tumbled slowly against the starfield, venting atmosphere from a jagged tear in its hull. Naya's shuttle sensors detected two life signs, one strong but agitated, the other barely registering. She maneuvered carefully to the ship's emergency airlock, fighting the drift caused by the vessel's rotation. The human who met her at the airlock was nothing like the propaganda broadcasts she'd seen. Marcus Chen Okafor was tall and lean, with dark skin and intelligent eyes that widened in shock at her appearance. His coveralls were stained with coolant and blood, his hands trembling from exhaustion or stimulants. "You came," he said simply, and Naya felt the wave of relief and gratitude wash over her empathic senses. "I didn't think." "Thank you." Language barriers dissolved as Naya activated her translation matrix, the neural implant allowing near instantaneous communication. "Show me the injured person," she said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. Marcus led her through the ship's cramped corridors to a small medical bay where a human woman lay unconscious on a diagnostic bed. Her injuries were severe but treatable: internal bleeding, possible concussion, dehydration. More concerning was the data pad Marcus pressed into Naya's hands. She was fleeing something, he explained. Her escape pod was nearly out of power. "When I found her, these files, they show experiments, torture. Someone was using her people as test subjects. The documents were encoded, but Naya's intelligence training allowed her to piece together fragments. Illegal bioresearch, probably conducted by one of the human megacorporations that operated in the lawless sectors. The woman had stolen evidence of their crimes and paid a terrible price for it. "We need to get her to a medical facility," Naya said, checking the woman's vital signs. "My shuttle has basic medbay capabilities, but they'll be looking for her," Marcus interrupted. "Whoever did this has resources, connections, if we take her to any official facility." Naya met his eyes, seeing her own moral dilemma reflected. There, they were both caught between duty and conscience, between following orders and following their hearts. The human woman stirred slightly, murmuring something in her sleep, and Naya made her choice. "There's a place," she said quietly. "A terraforming station in the Kepler Drift. It's outside Confederate space. Technically neutral territory. They have medical facilities and a friend who might help." Marcus nodded, understanding passing between them without words. They worked together to stabilize the woman for transport, their hands occasionally brushing as they shared the cramped space. Each contact sent small jolts through Naya's nervous system, not unpleasant, but unfamiliar. She'd never experienced such direct emotional resonance with an alien before. As they prepared to transfer their patient to Naya's shuttle, Marcus caught her arm gently. "I don't even know your name," he said. "Naya," she replied, her bioluminescent markings flickering with what her people called Valthara, the warm light of new connection. "And I'm probably making the biggest mistake of my life." Marcus smiled, and she felt his emotions shift toward something warmer, more complex. "Then, we'll make it together." Marcus had salvaged enough derelict ships to know the sound of dying systems, but he'd never heard it in harmony with his own heartbeat. As Naya's shuttle detached from the Wanderer's dream, he watched his home of 3 years tumble away into the cosmic dark, taking with it everything he owned except the clothes on his back and the unconscious woman they'd just rescued. The Zelhari shuttle was a study in elegant efficiency, all flowing curves and soft bioluminescent panels that seemed to respond to Naya's emotional state. When she was concentrating, they pulsed with steady blue light. When she glanced at him, which happened more often than strictly necessary for piloting, the patterns shifted to warmer hues that reminded him of sunset on his childhood home. "Your ship," Naya said softly, adjusting their course toward the Kepler Drift. "I'm sorry you had to leave it." Marcus settled into the co-pilot's seat, trying not to stare at the way her skin seemed to channel starlight. "It was just metal and circuits. What we saved." He gestured toward the medical alcove, where their patient rested in induced sleep. "That's what matters." The translation matrix made conversation possible, but it couldn't convey the subtle harmonics in Naya's voice, the way certain words seemed to resonate with unspoken meaning. Marcus found himself listening not just to her words, but to the emotions beneath them, something he'd never experienced with another being, human or otherwise. "Tell me about salvage work," she said, and he heard genuine curiosity rather than polite conversation. "It's mostly loneliness punctuated by moments of terror," he admitted. "You drift through dead ships, trying to find something valuable among the wreckage. Most of the time it's just scrap metal and broken dreams. But sometimes," he paused, watching her luminescent markings shift to an attentive golden hue, "sometimes you find something beautiful that survived against all odds." Their eyes met, and Marcus felt a jolt of connection that had nothing to do with electromagnetic fields. Naya's markings flared brighter, and she quickly turned back to the controls. "The woman we rescued," she said, changing the subject with obvious effort. "Do you know her name?" The pod's registry listed her as Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenobiologist. According to the data fragments, she was working for Titan Biosystems until she discovered what they were really doing to their research subjects. Marcus's voice hardened. "Corporate bastards have been disappearing people from the frontier colonies for years. No one with enough power cared to investigate." Naya's patterns shifted to angry red spirals. "My people have protocols against interfering in human affairs, but this..." She touched the data pad containing Elena's evidence. "This transcends politics." The next several hours passed in comfortable conversation, interspersed with companionable silence. Marcus learned that Naya had trained as both a communications specialist and an empath, that she'd requested the isolated monitoring post to escape the overwhelming emotions of crowded Zelhari cities. She learned that he'd been salvaging for 5 years, ever since his family's mining operation went bankrupt. and that he'd never stayed in one place long enough to form lasting connections. Is that by choice? She asked as they prepared to drop out of hyperspace near the terraforming station. Marcus considered the question seriously. I used to think so. Now I'm not sure if I was avoiding attachment or if attachment was avoiding me. Their destination materialized on the view screen. Kepler Station, a sprawling complex of biodomes and industrial modules orbiting a gas giant's moon. The site should have filled Marcus with relief sanctuary for Elena, medical care, safety from corporate pursuit. Instead, he felt a strange melancholy at the thought of their journey ending. Your friend, he said as Naya initiated docking procedures. Will she really help us? Kira Thorne. Naya's markings softened to warm amber. We met during a cultural exchange program years ago. She's special. If anyone can heal Elena and keep her safe, it's Kira. The docking bay was filled with the humid warmth of growing things, and Marcus caught his first glimpse of their host, a tall human woman with auburn hair streaked with premature silver, wearing gardening clothes stained with rich earth. Her smile was radiant as she embraced Naya, and Marcus felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been jealousy. Naya, it's been too long. Kira's voice carried the slight accent of the agricultural worlds. And you brought friends. Introductions were swift. Elena's condition took priority. Kira led them through corridors lined with growing things to a medical bay that looked more like a garden conservatory than a sterile treatment room. As she worked over Elena's unconscious form, her hands moved with practiced competence, but her eyes kept drifting to the evidence of corporate brutality. She'll live, Kira announced after an hour of treatment, but she'll need time to heal, and somewhere safe to recover. The neural damage from whatever they did to her, it's extensive. She can stay here, Marcus asked, as long as needed. We're officially neutral territory, and I have friends in the Colonial Medical Corps who can provide legitimate documentation for her recovery. Kira glanced between Marcus and Naya. But what about you two? This isn't exactly a pleasure cruise destination. The question hung in the air like morning mist. Marcus looked at Naya, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her shifting biopatterns. They'd been thrown together by circumstances, united by a common cause, but now that Elena was safe, what held them together? I should return to my post, Naya said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. The military will be expecting my routine reports, and I should find another ship. Get back to work. Marcus's words felt hollow even to himself. Kira raised an eyebrow. Should is a dangerous word. It usually means you're about to do something that makes you miserable. She began cleaning her medical instruments with unnecessary vigor. Elena won't wake up for at least 12 hours, and you both look exhausted. Why don't you rest here tonight? Make your decisions with clear heads. That evening, as the station's artificial night cycle dimmed the corridor lighting, Marcus found himself walking through Kira's gardens. The biodomes were miraculous entire ecosystems thriving in controlled environments, preparing to seed new worlds with life. He paused beside a grove of earth fruit trees, their blossoms releasing perfume into the recycled air. Beautiful, isn't it? Naya's voice came from behind him, soft as starlight. He turned to find her approaching through the garden paths, her bioluminescent markings providing the only light in the artificial twilight. She'd changed from her uniform into simple civilian clothes that somehow made her seem more ethereal. Not less. Kira's life work, Marcus agreed, creating gardens in the void. They walked together in comfortable silence, following winding paths, between beds of alien flowers and terrestrial vegetables, at a small pond where bioluminescent fish created patterns of living light. They stopped. I've been thinking, Naya said, her voice barely above a whisper, about duty, about choices, about what happens when what you want conflicts with what you're supposed to do. Marcus moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability in her tone. What do you want? She turned to face him, her markings pulsing with complex patterns he was beginning to recognize as deep emotion. I want to know what it would be like to not be alone among the stars. I want to understand why looking at you makes my biopatterns shift to colors I've never seen before. I want, what? He prompted gently. I want to know if what I'm feeling is real, or just the stress of breaking every regulation I've ever sworn to uphold. Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her hand. Her skin was warm, slightly electric, and her markings flared at the contact. "Does this feel real to you?" "Yes," she whispered, and her admission carried the weight of revelation. They stood together in the garden's twilight, two souls from different worlds who had found each other in the infinite dark. Above them, the dome's transparent aluminum panels showed the gas giant's swirling clouds and the cold fire of distant stars, a reminder of how vast the universe was, and how precious it was to find connection in its emptiness. "We could stay," Marcus said quietly. "Help Kira with her work. Build something together instead of drifting alone." Naya's markings shifted to the warm golden hue he was learning meant hope. "We could," she agreed. "But first, there's something I need to tell you about Elena's research data, something that changes everything." Kira Thorne had learned long ago that the best way to mend broken things was to surround them with growing life. Her greenhouse laboratory hummed with the quiet symphony of thriving ecosystems, water trickling through hydroponic channels, leaves rustling in artificial breezes, the soft chirping of pollinating insects she'd imported from a dozen worlds. She'd been cross-pollinating Terran tomatoes with Centauri soil fungus when Marcus and Naya arrived with their unconscious patient. Now, 18 hours later, she knelt beside the bed she'd prepared in the greenhouse's medical alcove, watching Elena Vasquez's eyes flutter beneath closed lids. The woman was beautiful even in induced sleep, high cheekbones, and olive skin that spoke of mixed Mediterranean heritage, dark hair that spread across the pillow like spilled ink. But it was the data pad beside her bed that truly captured Kira's attention. Elena's stolen research revealed horrors that made Kira's stomach clench with familiar nausea. She'd seen similar files before, during her brief stint as a colonial medical corps field medic. Corporate-sponsored research that treated sentient beings like laboratory animals, extracting genetic material, testing biological weapons, mapping neural pathways through torture. It was why she'd left medicine for botany, why she'd chosen to nurture life instead of trying to repair what others had broken. "The neural inhibitor is wearing off," Kira murmured to the monitoring equipment, though she was really talking to the woman who couldn't yet hear her. "You're safe now. Whatever they did to you, it's over." Elena's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. They were deep brown, flecked with gold, and filled with terror that gradually shifted to wariness as she took in her surroundings. Plants everywhere, soft lighting, the smell of earth and growing things, nothing like the sterile laboratories of her nightmares. "Where?" Elena's voice was hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed hours earlier. "Kepler Station." "In the drift." Kira kept her voice gentle, professional. "You're in my greenhouse. Marcus found you in an escape pod, brought you here for treatment." "Marcus?" Confusion clouded Elena's features. "Human male, salvage pilot. He and a Zelhari woman named Naya rescued you. They saved your life." Kira helped Elena sit up slowly, supporting her weight. "Do you remember what happened? How you got in that pod?" The question triggered something devastating. Elena's face crumpled, and her whole body began to shake. "They killed them all," she whispered. "The test subjects, when I tried to stop the experiments, when I threatened to expose what Titan Biosystems was doing. They decided I knew too much." Kira pulled a chair closer to the bed, settling within arm's reach but not crowding. 20 years of medical training had taught her that healing trauma required patience, space, and the gradual rebuilding of trust. "You don't have to talk about it now," she said softly. "You're safe here, neutral territory, legitimate medical facility, whatever evidence you took with you, it's secure." But Elena seemed to need to speak, as if the words had been building pressure inside her like steam in a sealed container. "I was supposed to develop agricultural applications for alien biochemistry, improving crop yields, disease resistance. Instead, they were creating weapons." She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself small on the bed. "Pathogens designed to target specific genetic markers. They needed test subjects from different species to map the effectiveness. Captured soldiers, refugees, anyone who wouldn't be missed." Kira felt her own breathing grow shallow. "How many? Hundreds, maybe thousands over the years. They called it Project Harvest." Elena's voice broke on the name. I tried to document everything, to get evidence to the colonial authority. But Titan has people everywhere. Contracts with the military, connections in government. So you ran. I stole everything I could carry and ran. But not before. Elena's hands twisted in the bedsheets. Not before I destroyed their primary laboratory, set fire to the research wing. I couldn't save the ones who were already dead, but I could make sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. The admission hung between them like a confession. Kira studied Elena's face, seeing not just trauma, but guilt, the terrible weight of choices, made in impossible circumstances. You did what you had to do, Kira said finally. You stopped them. Did I, or did I just scatter them to other facilities, other projects? Elena looked directly at Kira for the first time, and the intensity in her brown eyes was startling. Do you know what it's like to be a scientist? To believe in the power of knowledge to heal and help, only to discover you've been complicit in murder? Yes, Kira answered honestly, I do. Something shifted in Elena's expression, recognition, perhaps, or relief at finding someone who understood. You were medical corps, field medic, trauma surgery. I saw what corporate security consultants did to colonists who opposed resource extraction. Patch them up, ship them back for more interrogation, repeat until they broke or died. Kira's voice grew distant. I couldn't be part of it anymore, so you became a gardener, a terraforming specialist. I help dead worlds become living ones. It's healing, in a different way. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, surrounded by the quiet activity of growing things. Elena's breathing gradually steadied, and some of the tension left her shoulders. She began to notice her surroundings more carefully, the clever integration of medical equipment with natural systems, the way diagnostic readouts were disguised among flowering vines. This is remarkable, she said, genuine wonder, replacing fear in her voice. You've created a complete ecosystem. The air recycling alone must be incredibly efficient. 97% efficiency, Kira replied, pleased by Elena's scientific interest. The plants process atmospheric waste while the medical sensors monitor patient vitals. Through bioelectromagnetic resonance. No invasive monitoring, no sterile isolation. Elena's eyes lit up with the first spark of enthusiasm Kira had seen from her. Bioelectromagnetic resonance? I've read theoretical papers, but I've never seen it implemented practically. Would you like me to show you how it works for the next hour? Kira guided Elena through the greenhouse laboratory, explaining how she'd integrated living systems with medical technology. Elena's questions grew more animated, more complex, revealing a brilliant mind hungry for knowledge that helped rather than harmed. They were examining the root structure of an Andromedan healing vine. When Elena suddenly stopped talking, Kira looked up to find her staring at a small memorial alcove tucked between the flowering trees. Photos of colonists she'd failed to save during her medical corps days. People whose names she'd never learned, but whose faces she couldn't forget. You carry them with you, Elena said softly. Someone should remember them. Someone should know their deaths mattered. Elena reached out tentatively, touching one of the photographs with gentle fingers. I have names too, the research subjects. I memorized every file before I destroyed the lab. Would you like to add them here? When you're ready, Elena nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. I'd like that very much. As evening approached and the greenhouse's lighting shifted to match the station's day cycle, Kira prepared a simple meal in her small kitchen. Elena sat at the table, looking more alive than she had since waking, asking questions about hydroponic nutrition and soil composition with the enthusiasm of someone rediscovering her love of science. You could stay, Kira said as they ate. Help me with the terraforming research, your background in biochemistry, my experience with agricultural systems. We could develop better methods for introducing Earth-compatible ecosystems to alien worlds. Elena's fork paused halfway to her mouth. They'll be looking for me. Titan Biosystems won't just let me disappear with what I know. Let them look. You're officially listed as a trauma patient in neutral medical care. Your friend Mark is made sure the paperwork was properly filed. Kira leaned forward slightly. Besides, the best way to fight monsters isn't to hide from them. It's to build something beautiful that proves they're wrong. Something beautiful. Eleanor repeated thoughtfully. Life. Kira said simply. Growing where it wasn't supposed to be able to grow. Thriving despite every attempt to destroy it. Elena set down her fork and looked around the greenhouse. At the impossible garden blooming in the void between stars. At the memorial alcove where the forgotten dead were remembered. At the woman who'd chosen to heal worlds instead of patching up their wounds. I spent 3 years developing better ways to extract genetic material from living tissue. She said quietly, what if I spent the next 3 years learning how to help that tissue flourish instead? What if you did? Kira replied, and her smile was like sunrise over newly planted fields outside the greenhouse dome. The gas giant storms painted auroras across the artificial sky, and in the distance, a small shuttle prepared for departure. Marcus and Naya were leaving together, bound for destinations unknown, carrying their own hopes for what they might build together among the stars. But inside the greenhouse, 2 women sat surrounded by growing things, planning how to turn knowledge of destruction into wisdom of creation. They spoke of soil composition and atmospheric processing, of memorial gardens and living laboratories, of the delicate work of nurturing life in places where it had never existed before. It was, Elena thought, as sleep finally claimed her on her second night in the greenhouse, the most beautiful. Javin Reese had always prided himself on reading people, a skill essential for diplomatic work. But the encrypted message on his personal console defied interpretation. 3 days after Marcus and Naya had departed Kepler Station with Elena, safely recovered, he'd received orders that made no sense. Retrieve a stolen Zelhari asset from the terraforming facility and return her to Confederate custody. The asset's description matched Naya Velter perfectly. Javin stared at his reflection in the shuttle's viewport as he approached Kepler Station, trying to reconcile the woman Marcus had described brilliant, compassionate, willing to risk everything for strangers with the cold bureaucratic language of his orders. Rogue operative, the file labeled her. Compromised by alien contact. Retrieval authorized by Confederate High Command. His friendship with Marcus went back 15 years, to their shared service aboard a deep space survey vessel. They'd saved each other's lives more times than either could count. Shared dreams of better futures over cheap synthesized alcohol in 1,000 port bars. When Marcus had sent word that he'd found something worth staying for, Javin had been genuinely happy. For his old friend, now he was being ordered to destroy it. Kepler Station Control, this is Diplomatic Courier Meridian. He transmitted as he entered the station's traffic pattern, requesting priority docking for official colonial authority business. The response came from an unfamiliar voice professional, cautious. Copy, Meridian. Dock at Bay 7. Station administrator will meet you there. Javin had expected Marcus to be waiting in the docking bay. Instead, he found himself facing a tall woman with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his appearance. Her clothes were practical work coveralls over a simple shirt, but she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. I'm Kira Thorne, station administrator, she said, extending her hand. Welcome to Kepler Station. Diplomat Reese. Her grip was firm, her manner cordial but wary. Javin's diplomatic instincts kicked in automatically, cataloging subtle signs of tension in her posture, the way her eyes never quite met his directly. Thank you for accommodating my arrival on short notice, he replied. I'm here on official business regarding a Confederate citizen who may have taken refuge here. I see. Perhaps we should discuss this in my office. Kira led him through corridors, lined with growing things, past workshops where technicians tended to atmospheric processors and soil composition analyzers. The station hummed with purposeful activity. But Javin noticed how conversations stopped when they passed, how workers found sudden reasons to be elsewhere. They knew why he was here. Kira's office was actually a small meeting room adjacent to a massive greenhouse dome. Through the transparent walls, Javin could see impossible gardens thriving in the controlled environment, earth plants growing beside alien flora, creating ecosystems that had never existed in nature. Impressive facility, he commented, settling into the chair Kira indicated. We're proud of our work here, she replied, pouring water from a pitcher into 2 glasses. 13 worlds successfully terraformed in the past 5 years, with minimal environmental disruption to existing ecosystems and minimal political complications. I imagine neutral territory has its advantages. Kira's smile was carefully neutral. We find that plants grow better without the interference of political boundaries. Javan opened his diplomatic case and withdrew the official documents. I'm here regarding Naya Velter, a Confederate communications officer who's been classified as absent without leave. Intelligence suggests she may have sought medical treatment here after sustaining injuries in the line of duty. Medical records are confidential, Kira said smoothly. I'm sure you understand, of course. However, as a diplomatic representative of the colonial authority, I'm authorized to request the return of Confederate personnel to their proper chain of command. He slid a data pad across the table. All quite legal, I assure you. Kira examined the documents with the careful attention of someone familiar with bureaucratic maneuvering. These seem to be in order, she said finally. But I'm afraid you're operating under incorrect intelligence. Naya Velter isn't here, I see. Javan leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Then perhaps you could tell me where she went. When she left, 2 days ago, she and a friend departed together. Kira's voice was carefully steady. I believe they were heading for the Outer Rim territories, beyond colonial authority jurisdiction. The lie was expertly delivered, but Javan caught the slight tremor in her voice, the way her fingers tightened around her water glass. His diplomatic training had taught him to recognize deception, but it had also taught him to understand the motivations behind it. This friend, he said carefully, would that be Marcus Chenokafer? You know Marcus, we served together. He's a good man. Javan paused, choosing his words carefully. The kind of man who'd do anything to protect someone he cared about. Something shifted in Kira's expression, surprise, perhaps, at finding common ground. He is. They both are. Then you'll understand why I'm in a difficult position. My orders are quite specific regarding Naya Velter's return to Confederate custody. Failure to comply could result in complications for this facility. The threat hung between them, unspoken but clear. Kira's green eyes hardened, and when she spoke, her voice carried the steel of someone who'd faced worse threats than bureaucratic pressure. Diplomat Reese, I've spent 10 years building something meaningful here. We've helped thousands of people, created homes for refugees, given hope to worlds that had none. If you think I'll sacrifice innocent people to protect our funding, you've misjudged me. Javan felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the sensation of duty conflicting with conscience that had plagued him throughout his diplomatic career. Miss Thorne, I want you to understand that I have no personal investment in this retrieval. I'm simply following orders, are you? She challenged. Or are you here because you're Marcus's friend and you wanted to see for yourself what he'd found worth staying for? The question hit closer to home than Javan cared to admit. He'd volunteered for this assignment when he could have delegated it to a subordinate, told himself it was professional curiosity about Confederate colonial relations. But the truth was simpler and more troubling. He'd wanted to meet the woman who'd changed his friend's life. Where are they really? He asked quietly. Kira studied his face for a long moment, then made a decision that would have consequences for all of them. Follow me. She led him deeper into the station, through service corridors he hadn't seen during his official tour. They passed laboratories where scientists worked on soil samples, workshops where engineers assembled atmospheric processors, living quarters that felt more like home than military barracks. They stopped at a door marked Hydroponics Lab 7. Kira palmed the access panel, and the door slid open to reveal a small but sophisticated laboratory. At the far end, near a wall of growing vegetables, two people worked side by side over a microscope station. Marcus looked up first, his face cycling through surprise, pleasure, and wariness in the space of a heartbeat. Javan, what are you doing here? Official business. I'm afraid. Javan stepped into the lab, acutely aware of the diplomatic credentials that felt suddenly heavy in his pocket. Hello, Marcus. The Zelhari woman Naya straightened slowly from her work. She was more beautiful than the surveillance photos had suggested, her translucent blue skin catching the lab's lighting. bioluminescent markings pulsing with what Javan's briefing materials had described as stress. Patterns. But it was her eyes that struck him, intelligent, compassionate, and utterly unafraid. "You're here for me," she said simply. "I'm here to offer you a choice," Javan replied, surprising himself with the words. "The Confederate High Command wants you returned for debriefing. They're concerned about your recent activities." Marcus moved protectively closer to Naya, and Javan saw the way her markings shifted to calmer patterns at his proximity. Whatever had developed between them was clearly mutual, deep, and absolutely genuine. "What kind of choice?" Naya asked. Yavi Yen looked around the lab at the evidence of meaningful work, at the obvious care these people had for each other, at the life they were building together. Then he thought about his orders, about the bureaucrats who'd written them, about the difference between following rules and doing what was right. "You could come with me voluntarily," he said carefully, "face whatever consequences await." Or he paused, meeting her eyes directly. A diplomatic courier's records could show that Naya Velter was never found, that she'd already departed for unknown coordinates before I arrived. Understanding dawned in Naya's expression, followed quickly by suspicion. "Why would you risk that?" Javan smiled, thinking of Marcus's description of their first meeting, of the choice to risk everything for strangers. "Because sometimes the most diplomatic thing you can do is ignore diplomacy entirely." Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand to his old friend. "Javan, don't thank me yet." Javan interrupted, clasping Marcus's hand firmly. "I still have to figure out how to explain to my superiors that a trained intelligence operative simply vanished into the void." "Actually," Kira interjected with a slight smile, "I might be able to help with that."